now we're just getting right into this conversation with Felipe. As you can see, this man is a professional. You have some high quality sound, and look at that background. Look at this guy, does not mess around. We're doing some live coding learnings that Felipe has had. He's started doing MLOps live coding a while ago, and that's how you came up on my radar. That was something that I saw you doing because you posted something on LinkedIn, maybe, or it was just like it popped up in my YouTube feed, and I thought that's fascinating. Like I really like that, and I know that you just got to a new job, but you've also been an astroparticle physicist, and you've gone from working as like a data scientist or doing machine learning in a research setting and then having to productionize machine learning. So I want to talk about the differences that you see there. And I also want to talk about Twitch and what you're doing on Twitch, how that whole story happened. I think first, before we get too ahead of ourselves, we should learn a little about you, and you can give us the whole background on how you were doing this astrophysics and then you got into machine learning and what that journey looked like.
Yeah. So my background is in physics. My bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, all in Brazil, from Brazilian universities, University of São Paulo and University of Campinas. So in the doctorate, I focused on particle physics and in special astroparticle physics. That's a mix of astrophysics and particle physics. And in that work, I had a lot of experience dealing with data. Like in that context, no one called it data science, but it's kind of data science, right? It's getting data from accelerators and different detectors of astroparticle physics, so particles, and getting that data and analyzing it in different ways. For example, one thing that I did was like a type of regression, and the functions that I was actually fitting, they were integrals, like integral functions. So it was very heavy computationally. And I even used the universe cluster to make all these calculations. So it was kind of data science, let's say, some machine learning, more basic machine learning stuff. And yeah, these astroparticles that I'm talking about, they are like particles that come from different places in the universe. We don't really know exactly where each come from, but they come from, for example, stars that are exploding, supernovas, things like that. And they reach the Earth by accident, and we detect it here on the ground. And there are many underground detectors, like in the mountains, for example, in Italy, there's one that's famous called Gran Sasso Lab, where they have a huge tank of water, and they just keep waiting for some particles to traverse that tank of water. And the experiment that I most worked with, I mean, using data from it and trying to get insights from it, was IceCube. That's a huge detector in Antarctica. That's actually 1 kilometer cubic. You know, it's because it's the ice of Antarctica, and they have some holes with detectors, and the whole volume of water, ice actually, that it's using as a detector is like 1 kilometer cubic. So it's huge. It's even hard to imagine the size of that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So maybe something about how I transitioned right to the industry. In the end of my doctorate, of course, I was thinking about what I would do with my life after investing so much on academia, so much of my time on academia. And I applied for many postdoc positions. Things in Brazil were a bit hard in that moment because we had too many doctors, like too many people with PhD, the equivalent of a PhD, with less like positions to fill. And there was a time that people spent time abroad. Like I did this, I stayed 1.5 years in Delaware here in the US. So many people with very good CV competing for the same postdoc positions was really hard for me. Then I realized I could enter the industry maybe. Then I applied first for a geophysics company. And this opened my mind because never realized I could work in a company. So I started studying a bit of data science in some boot camps. I heard about this years back, and I started seeing that in Brazil, companies were hiring for data scientists. Then I started investing in this. I moved to São Paulo, started having many interviews, and I ended up in a company called NeoWay, and I worked with them for 3 years. And I moved here to the US, transferred to the Manhattan office that they had here.
So tell me a little bit about
Yep.
how, like, developing these models for companies was different from developing models in
Oh, yeah.
physics. You mentioned like you were doing data science a little bit and then you got into it more and you started to realize, well, I can work for a company. How did that differ?
Yeah, so I think the dynamics, like the day-to-day dynamics of work is pretty different, because when you are in the academia, usually you have a supervisor and you meet with this person. So many times it's like weekly meetings, and the steps are slow. I felt always that I was doing something very slow. I was working a lot during my doctorate, but doing it in a slow pace. In the industry, I felt that like everything is, as people say, a fire drill. You always need to do things so fast and to solve things as quick as possible, because there's a lot of money involved, right? There are customers on the other side. Uh, then also the whole agile way of working, you don't have this in academia. This is the first thing, right? Not talking about data science itself, just the dynamics. The other thing in terms of data science, for example, I was doing regression, as I explained, during my doctorate. But the purpose of that regression was different, was not to really predict so well the phenomenon. Of course, you want that, but what you really want is to discover the parameters of your functions that you are fitting. So for example, one parameter can be the mass of a particle. And you really care about the mass of the particle and establishing limits for the mass of that particle. While in data science, in the industry, you can have thousands of coefficients in a regression, in a linear regression, for example, and you don't care much about the coefficients, you care more about how well it's predicting. Although you care about the coefficients to interpret your model. But like you interpret, you throw them away, you don't care anymore. You run another prediction, like you train again, you throw everything out because now you have a new model. In physics, like the parameters are really important. They have a physical meaning, they really mean something. So that's a huge difference in mindset, I think.
So I'm always fascinated to hear about this idea of like the data scientist who's going into operational machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about this in the community of like, is a Jupyter notebook ready for production? Or should you use a Jupyter notebook in production? I think is the better way of phrasing that question. And I know that you have some thoughts on that transition. You went through that transition going from like the lone wolf Jupyter notebook data scientist and then into operational ML. Can you explain that process a bit? And then after that, I see there's some people in the chat that are mentioning they're doing some live coding too. So we'll get into that. But I want to hear about this idea of transitioning from a Jupyter notebook to operational ML. And were you using your Jupyter notebook in production? Please say no.
No.
And what that was like.
Yeah, so I watched your previous interview, and I heard lots of time there, like proof of concept hell, right? POC hell. And I think I lived that. So for almost 3 years, I was working only on POCs. And most of the time, it was on Jupyter notebooks, because the thought of business was always like my customers, basically, they always wanted to see the value and try to roll out more manual work, let's say, for example, spreadsheets to salespeople so they could try out that model on the field first, like very manually with spreadsheets, then maybe later as a product. So, and this takes a lot of time for people to really understand the project, understand the results, and really like have the buy-in of stakeholders. So I was living in that hell, let's say, only in Jupyter Notebooks. But in many instances, I was like running code manually and sending it to a bucket, for example, in AWS, so the customer could read it from there. And at some points, I would schedule that job. But it was like at that level. When I was leaving that company that I worked for 3 years, the first job I had, I started organizing my code a bit better to hand out to my colleagues. And that was some kind of transition where I started paying attention to more software development, or at least organizing better my code, And then I had some period of unemployment. I invested a lot on trying to learn these things by myself. As you said in the start, it's really hard to find sources for that. Like there's not many places where you can start learning like machine learning operations or software development for machine learning from the start, like from the scratch. So I started doing this by myself. I started a job. This job was brief, was like for 4 months that I had, but it was product related. And I started paying more attention to that, working with people in the same repository at the same time. For example, I always used GitHub, but it was like a Dropbox, right? You just throw things there in the master, or now it's called main, right? And I started working really with other people, started paying attention. I had, on my own choice with my manager, I had the role of being like the police of software development practices, best practices.
Nice.
So I was learning and also trying to enforce that, let's say, inside the company.
Wait, so did you learn during this period between jobs?
Yeah.
Did you learn about software engineering, just the basics, fundamentals of software engineering, or was it with that skew towards machine learning?
It's hard to say that it was not linear, but for some job interviews that I did a lot of job interviews during the last year, like during the pandemic. And I knew that for some jobs I had to know a lot of this, the software development side, let's say. And I invested on this myself just to be able to tell people that I was at least learning these things, because I don't like to lie on interviews. So I really was trying that. And around January this year, I started a project called Greenhouse on GitHub. We'll start talking about this, I guess, because it's related to Twitch. First, I wanted to learn the Rust language, right? And I decided to make my own framework or template, let's say, for projects for Rust. And I don't know why I started going deep on this thing of making the templates of Rust for Rust development, and I didn't know much about Rust itself. But I wanted to like set up my Docker environment, like my containers and everything before starting learning. Then I had this whole framework.
What could go wrong?
But you learn a lot because Rust has a very, let's say, fixed way of doing things. Like the package has many different pieces. You need to concatenate, like you need to glue everything together very well. So I learned a bit about this. This project is not going on anymore. Now I'm focusing on Python for that project. But it started like that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your projects and what made you start going into YouTube and Twitch, and like, yeah, what was the catalyst there?
Yeah, so YouTube channel came first. Both are called Data Science Bits. So I have Data Science Bits on YouTube and Data Science Bits on Twitch. The one on YouTube came first, and it was a way for me to maybe contribute to the community, of course, and also because I was struggling to get a job here in the US. It also served as a portfolio for me, Like there is the more community thinking and also more personal side, that I also needed to show people what was my level of knowledge. And on YouTube was focused on more on statistics, data science career, also a lot of videos on performance metrics for machine learning, especially classification. That was a way to show people what I learned on these years, and also was really cool to get feedback from the community and getting questions answered. And usually on LinkedIn, people send messages about those videos.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, really interesting for me to get through this path. And then with Twitch was more or less by accident. Like, let's say I saw some people in Brazil starting on Twitch. There's one colleague called Tel. He is the first like data scientist to really in Brazil start on Twitch and get more popular. And I saw him like doing cool stuff there and getting feedback all the time. And I saw that movement and I wanted to join that movement, let's say. And in Brazil, I think the Twitch scene is really strong for coders right now. And I decided to start some videos very quickly, focus on that project called Greenhouse. That's a template for machine learning, let's say, and the one specifically for Python. And I really loved it because on YouTube, I would usually weekly shoot some videos here with a similar setup, but with a professional camera. And there's a lot of work in editing the videos, making the audio sounds good, the image, cutting like all your video. Um, and on Twitch, you just turn on the camera, put some colorful lights. I use my own camera in the laptop, like I'm using here. So you just start coding, and that's it. You don't need to edit, and you get feedback at the same time. Like really, at that time when you are making the live stream, you get already feedback from people that are watching that. So it's very dynamic, and I feel also it's just something that I thought that during the pandemic, there was a change of mindset, I think, in the general audience. Like people are watching so many webinars, going or watching conferences online that they couldn't before. And there was a movement from like recorded videos on YouTube to live videos, live streams on Twitch. I think people are moving from one platform to the other to see the live streams because in Twitch is so dynamic. It's almost like the YouTube live, but there are more elements there that make it really suitable for that.
What do you think are the elements? Is it just like more engaged chat?
Yeah, I think this is a major aspect because there's some like emojis that you can use. There it's called emojis. Doesn't matter, just some emojis. You can buy stuff, you can contribute financially, like there on the chat. You can subscribe and contribute financially with your Prime account. You don't have to spend any additional money. You just select one streamer per month to be your like preferred streamer, let's say. And they redirect some money from subscription to the streamer. There are many elements like this, and on Twitch, it's really about watching it live. Like me personally, I don't have much patience of watching live streams that are stored there on the platform you can watch later, because there are so many elements that only make sense when the live stream is happening. Like people asking for there's something called reward that when you watch, you accumulate some points with the hours that you watch that streamer, and you can start buying stuff. You can buy, for example, something like I play the harmonica, like, and then there's one reward that's if you have, I think, 1,000 points now, you can ask me to play the harmonica during the live.
Nice.
It seems silly, but it's a way to stop some of the work that maybe people are tired and just play some stuff, and some people like it. And it's just a playful way of dealing with it. So this you don't find on YouTube. You could have it. Of course you can adapt, but Twitch was made for that. No?
One thing I find fascinating, and the people in the audience who have done Twitch or who have live coded, correct me if I'm wrong, I really like seeing the non-polished versions because I like seeing when you encounter bugs and knowing that it's like, okay, it doesn't all run smoothly the first time. And knowing that it's not only me that is running into these roadblocks, and then you get to see if it's someone that is good at voicing what they're thinking. I think that's really important, right? Because you can't just run into a bug and then you go, okay, let's figure this out, and then you do something and you fix the bug. It's like, I want to know what you were thinking when you saw that. All right, let's go read the logs. Let's go figure out, oh, it says this, so that must mean this. And then you take someone on a journey of solving the problems with you. And I'd love to know your way of looking at that and how you feel there too.
Yeah, so I think there are many types of code streamers on Twitch. Twitch was not made for coding, right? It was for gamers, and people start doing their own stuff on Twitch. I have seen even people cooking on Twitch. So, but about coding, right? Like live coding, there are many types of people. There are some people that they just turn on the camera. They actually put themselves on mute and they say like focus session, something like this. And they just show people what they are coding without interacting too much. Maybe on the chat only. Sometimes they will turn on the microphone to say something, but more focused. And then there are some people that vocalize. I think that's what you're talking about. It's like the old duck, like rubber duck that people had on their desk. Like I will talk to that duck to explain my ideas, and maybe I will understand better my thoughts or my logic. So on Twitch, I personally do this type of streams where I vocalize everything and I look at the documentation, and it's really nice because you lose that fear of showing to people that you don't know everything, and you need to really look at the documentation. I'm really terrible at remembering syntax, so I Google a lot. And I always tell people that the most important thing is not remembering by heart all the syntax, is having used it before, for example, and knowing where or what to look for on Google.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, I don't remember how, let's say, just very simple thing, how to join in a certain way with pandas. But I know that it's available. So I will just search on Google 1 minute and find out what's the syntax. And I don't think it's worth also having all these things by heart like this, because probably in the future you use another language and you have to learn all the syntax for that. So it's really important to know the concepts. And I think I lost my track of my train of thought on this part. So yeah, getting back, I think I vocalize a lot, and I think it's good for the audience to see the process. And maybe I should explain a bit about the project itself, right?
Yeah.
So it's called Greenhouse. It's a template for data work. It could be data science, data analytics, data engineering. It can be used for any Python project, but it's more focused on this type of work. And I'm even making like skeleton, let's say, or placeholders for machine learning training and prediction. But it's a template. So it's a code structure, let's say, that have many elements. For example, having containers where you can run safely your code. That's why it's called a greenhouse, because a greenhouse is where you keep your plants and protect it from the environment, right? And during winter, they survive. But the greenhouse also receives things from the outside, like the sunlight, right? So it's a container, but it has some ports, some ways of communicating. So that's the metaphor there.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's really a template. So it's a code structure where you will look at some pieces, for example, where I'm training the model. you replace that part for whatever you want for your own purpose, right? It's not a package that you call and your own code. Um, it's like a template, and GitHub even has a button there to like use this template. When you click there and create a new repository, it will copy all that code and you will start working on that. It's very similar to a project called Pachyderm by Apache and other things like Cadro or Kidro by
Kidro.
Quantum Black McKinsey. They are more, let's say, packages, but I think it has a lot of similarity with Pachyderm. And the reason I'm doing this way, I'm doing because there are so many other similar projects, right? It's because I'm not a machine learning engineer or machine learning operations specialist, like my background is not that, right? So I'm using that to learn a lot with the community, with the audience, and showing that process to the audience. Like I know best practices because I have worked with many different people, but I haven't maybe implemented many of these things. So it's a very good opportunity.
Do you find the audience helps you, or are
Yep.
they primarily learning?
I think it's both. So there are some people there that I know they're there to learn, but they also at the same time, for example, if I have some questions about how to use some specific package, I'm trying this out, I'm getting errors. Some people go to the documentation ahead of time, like before I do that, they see the solution, they send it on the chat, even though they are not also specialists on this subject. They help out and they ask for more resources, like more references for that. So they are learning a lot. There are some other people that are more experienced, but it's really interesting to see how they are influenced sometimes by what you are doing. So for example, there are some colleagues on Twitch that they were watching me using Docker Compose and they never heard about this before. They never tried to use. So on their own live streams, they started using that because they saw it was so easy to make a configuration file and start spinning like a Jupyter Notebook that works on the in the container, right? But exposed in a part, for example. Just simpler ways maybe of doing things. People learn and start reproducing. I do the same. I watch their live streams and I also start using packages that I saw there. For example, Prefect. It's like a workflow package similar to Airflow. I saw that in another live stream from a colleague, and I started implementing this on the greenhouse project.
So there's a few like logistical pieces that I'm wondering about. A, how are you deciding what projects or what problems to work on? And then B, how are you like, are all the resources your own? You're pouring all of your like spare cash into the infrastructure, and then like how do you decide on the data sets that you're using? How do you decide on the models? Are you doing all of that? Or is there any moments that you're going out and you're saying you're trying to crowdsource data?
No, there's no crowdsourcing data yet. So my philosophy there in that project is usually there wouldn't be any actual data, actual model in this type of project, just because it's something for the other people to use for multiple purposes, right? My choice in the greenhouse project was to choose a very simple project. It could be the iris dataset, for example. I chose the Palmer penguins dataset. Very simplistic, very small, very easy to understand. And it's there just as a placeholder, as I said. So you can replace by anything that you want. That's it. And then I start training models, like digesting the data, training models, predicting based on that, right? And then you can replace by anything. I'm not taking care about cloud environments, for example, because the person that uses the project should connect it to whatever person wants. I may make some configuration files to make this easier, for example, but that's not the purpose, right? It's just like a structure, like at the greenhouse, let's say, and you can connect with input data and output data. But with time, I haven't reached that point yet, but with time, I want to make it easier to make an API, for example, with that project. And I intend to have another repository, maybe where I will use the greenhouse project for a more robust data set. And then in this project, I will maybe connect to some databases, make it a bit more complex, try to use maybe AWS, to demonstrate how to use that project as an example,
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Now, for those that are listening and they want to get started with it, like any words of wisdom when it comes to live streaming?
With live streaming. Yeah, so don't be afraid to start it. There are many streamers that are actually learning from scratch. I have seen so many learning Python there. There are more front-end people on Twitch, I need to be honest. But anyway, many people are learning and they are showing the process of learning online. And I guess they are learning probably faster, getting help from other people faster because of that. You may choose not to do that because you don't want to expose yourself like this. If you know more, you can, for example, do like myself to create a project and develop that project live, or small projects. There are some data scientists there on Twitch that they are getting small projects like I want to use that data set from Kaggle and I want to make a good model and I want to show everyone how to do this. They go on for a few lives, let's say 5 live streams. They show from beginning to end and that's it, then the next project. So you need to be creative and don't be shy. For example, I hate um, live coding during interviews, job interviews. I hate it like with all my force, like I really hate it. And it's some kind of paradox that I'm doing this on Twitch. But for me, it's about being more relaxed there, try to be more relaxed and showing the process and all this. While on a job interview, there's a lot of pressure and you cannot make a crappy code there because you will lose that job. It's different situation. So for people that hate live coding like I do, it's completely different experience, I think. And you can make it fun. You can play your harmonica, you can make sessions that are only about drinking some beer and talking about random stuff just to chill out with your audience. It's very, very flexible.
So I'm also thinking about how just today I saw a post from one of our other guests, Adam, and he was mentioning how important it is for data scientists or machine learning engineers to write blog posts and document their journey. Do you feel like this is another way of doing that?
For sure, yeah. I also wrote a blog post on HackerNome, for example. There's one difference that, at least myself, I'm really perfectionist when I'm writing. So it took me a long time to write that blog post. It's short, but the shortest, the harder, actually, right? You want to polish it a lot, make nice figures and all this. And I feel that for me, that process is too slow. I learn a lot, but it's too slow. And you stay thinking about the same subjects for a long time, trying to polish. While live streaming is like very dynamic and very fast.
Yeah. And was there a point where you felt like because you're doing this, it has had an effect on your career? Like, did you get your most recent job because they saw that you had a Twitch, or is it just that you were more comfortable in these live coding interviews? How has it affected you and your career?
Yeah, so I think YouTube had a more direct impact on my interviews, my job interviews, because I did it first last year when I was looking intensely for a position. And it was really good because, as I said, it served as a portfolio. So when I started doing YouTube, shooting on YouTube, right away, all my interviews at some point, there was a discussion about this, and the interviewer was always happy to see how I was interacting with the community, how they liked one of the videos, things like that, you know. So it was really positive. Never like the decisive thing, like you are getting this job because of that. It was never like this, but was always a very positive element that I think was influencing the interviewers a lot. And for sure, I think it influenced the job that I got
Were
just
you
now.
putting it on your resume?
Yeah, of course, I put it.
Mm-hmm. And so then people
I
would
think
go
it's
and
important. Yeah.
yeah.
Blog posts, anything. Maybe you don't specify exactly which blog post, but you say that I have this repository where you can see all my text. Many times the interviewer won't go there and read or watch all your videos, but just to go there and take a look and see that there's something robust there, they are already very happy. So for anyone that's struggling with getting a job this time, I think it's very good. It's very positive, I think.
Hmm.
And then on Twitch, I think it didn't influence so much because it's more recent, but I think the influence is more in my career about what I'm learning from that experience.
Oh, okay.
I think I said this already, but like exposing yourself, showing your mistakes, um, vocalizing your thoughts. I think all of this make you a better programmer, I think, and a better maybe how to say, someone that can explain well some concepts. I think there are many positive sides on this, and I don't see any downside. I think of
Mm-hmm.
doing that. Can only see positive sides of
So
that.
talk to me about when you run into problems or talk to me about one specific time that you've run into a problem and it was like a big problem and you got through it. And
This
because
sounds like a job
yeah, I
interview
know. I
question.
just think about like when if I were doing that and then I get to something where I get stuck and I potentially spend an hour trying to just solve this small piece and I'm banging my head against the wall. Like I think nobody would want to actually watch me doing that. But I
Okay.
imagine there are
Yeah.
people and they really enjoy it.
So I think one of my first live streams, was really frustrated because from beginning to end, everything went wrong. Like I started doing something, like code was breaking. I decided to go for another path. The other choice also was bad and it broke. Um, I mean, my way of dealing with this is maybe explaining why I'm taking another path. And in the end, if things didn't work, I always tell people that I will work a bit on the side, um, offline, maybe, just to not lose so much time. And next live stream, I always have the solution for that. Or it happens sometimes that I turn on the camera randomly, like during the day when I had more time before I accepted this job that I'm working on right now. I would turn on my camera, do like the other streamers, like put on mute, say focus session, something like this, work on that problem. Anyone can watch I solving that problem, but it's more like a side session in a different time where people can just see what I'm doing, just because I also want that like 99% of my coding in that project happens live. I prefer
Hmm.
to do it like that because it the project is about that. It's about learning, and in the end, if that project is useful, I will be happy. But it's more
Mhm.
about the learning experience.
And so some other really cool projects that you've seen on Twitch. I mean, you mentioned there are some end-to-end projects that have been set up and they do like 5 sessions or however
Mhm.
many sessions it takes. They set it up and then they move on to the next project. Is there anything that has been interesting for you as you are watching other streamers that you could recommend to us?
Yeah, so there's this channel. Unfortunately, it's in Portuguese actually. Tell me why. But this guy is the one that influenced me to start doing Twitch. Um, so he has many of these interesting projects, and actually the most interesting one was not a project, but was like focusing on a specific topic. Like it's not a class, I think, because it was not prepared. Probably he improvised, but he wanted to show concepts about SQL, you know, SQL. Um, and I think he went on for 2 weeks or 3 weeks just about SQL because he was saying, and I think he's right, this is a really important topic for, especially for beginners to enter the market in data science. People usually avoid learning that, but it's one of the most important elements that you need to learn before trying to get into data science. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think about that, and I think about the people that are starting from scratch. I like how you said there's a lot of people that are learning, and they're using this as their way of learning and potentially learning faster because they get help from the communities that they start. And can you talk to us a little bit, just for these last couple of minutes, maybe about the community aspect of this and why you feel that is important?
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning that like you have the Slack channel for machine learning operations community. Usually on Twitch, people have a Discord server. It's very similar to Slack. It's very similar to IRC, right? IERC. And I have one. If you go to my Twitch channel, you'll find there the link for the server to enter there. And offline, like outside of the slot time for the live streams, people interact a lot on this chats actually. You know, and I follow I'm part of many Discord servers, and I'm always taking a look there to see if there's something interesting going on. Sometimes they even have their other live streams in Discord. So there's a whole community, I think, being built around Twitch, and I think it's being done through Discord. I forgot about exactly where you wanted to get this question. I got a bit
That was perfect. I mean, it was the role of community within Twitch.
Yeah, and I think people are helping each other a lot. Like this guy from Brazil, Theo, he started this trend, let's say in Brazil, for data science. Some people followed him. I'm not the only one. And I feel that these people are really like my friends. I always talk to them and we have some ideas about, I even discussed an idea of a startup with one of these friends. Of course, it didn't go on, but anyway, just like interactions that I didn't have before, just because we are building this like as a community together. So, and my lives are in English. I started doing that in Portuguese only because of that community. And I asked many people about the language if it would hurt being in English. People that were watching me, most of them said it wouldn't hurt. So I decided to transition to English. Some sessions, especially about GitHub, they have been in Portuguese for now. But it's very flexible. People don't stick too much with these rules, and Twitch is different from YouTube. And it's worth mentioning also, I didn't mention this, I usually have one session per week about Git and GitHub. Like, although my greenhouse project has some Git elements, of course, because of versioning, for example, sending tags to GitHub to take care of the continuous development, right, part of the project. But there's one session focused only on Git and like reviewing some basic concepts. I'm not a specialist on Git, and I know you can do very complex stuff with Git. So I'm trying to follow this path of learning everything that I can about this subject. So
amazing. I love talking to you about this. I'm fascinated by this whole community that is popping up there. I find it really important as we continue to move on with machine learning operations, because if there are best practices and if there are experts that are there sharing their knowledge, I love seeing that. And I think it is totally needed in the MLOps community and the greater community at large, right? So
I think,
I'm
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think like Twitch is becoming such a trend that even companies are following this. So for example, there are 3 different GitHub channels on Twitch, like official Twitch channels. There's one official GitHub, there's GitHub Education, and there's GitHub Enterprise. This last one is just for seminars, and I think people from different companies connect there from time to time to watch some seminars. The other 2 are really cool. Like I have watched some things, and it's really interesting. There's one guy there that he's like, I don't know what's his position, but it's like the evangelist maybe of GitHub, something like that. And he always interviews someone that has a project that's really focused on GitHub things. For example, tools that use GitHub as a central element. And was really interesting to see in one live stream, for example, he trying to help the person out with some GitHub, how to say, like trying to recover some stuff from the repository. And in the end, he said, okay, let's just delete the repository and clone it again. And I was really amazed. Oh, I thought I was the only one that did that. But even the official guy from GitHub is saying that, because sometimes it's so complex that it's the best solution.
Yep, exactly. Just turn it off and turn it on. Delete
yeah,
it.
it's fascinating to see
new.
these things happening live, you know. So you think these people, like, they are invincible, but you see some soft spots, and you can feel better with yourself that you're not such a crappy coder, because like everyone make these mistakes.
Yep. Yeah, I find it fascinating, and I think it is something that, as you said, we're going to see more and more companies doing it, and we're going to see more and more people doing it, as especially in the MLOps world, as it becomes more common and there is more knowledge, or there's more demand for people that need to know about this. And since it is so complicated of a environment that we play in, I imagine we're going to get to see some people that are learning, as you talked about, that are starting from the beginning and then going up, and then others that are really trying to decipher this end to end and how long that would take, or just making sure that they show each step of the puzzle. So for me, it's super cool to hear about. I hope that everyone else listening also enjoyed. Felipe, this has been excellent. Thank you so much, man. Any last words?
Last words. Yeah, so please follow me on YouTube, on Twitch. Please visit the repository. It's called Pi minus Greenhouse, right? And you can find it in my profile. That's Felipe Penha. But of course, start your own channel on YouTube, on Twitch. Twitch is really easy to start. On YouTube, people want to have the perfect setup, like the perfect camera and everything. On Twitch is much easier, and you can start interact. If you don't want to expose yourself on Twitch, at least try to visit Twitch, make your account, connect it with Prime, and go there and see what's happening, because I think it's really, really intense. Started with the game developers, I think. You can find many like cool game developers there, very advanced stuff, like real PlayStation games being developed live, you know. But about like machine learning, data science, we'll find very cool stuff happening there, and I think it's worth like being part of that community.
Do you use any special streaming software for it?
It's OBS. It's open source.
Okay.
And so it's perfect. There's a Twitch specific platform, but it's only for Windows and Mac, I think. You cannot use on Linux. I'm a Linux user. And OBS you can use in Windows, Mac, Linux, if I'm not mistaken. So it's perfect.
Nice. Yeah. Excellent, Felipe.
Thank you.
Awesome stuff, man. And I'll be checking you out on Twitch for sure. Everyone else, go and watch him, and we will see you next week for another MLOps community meetup. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Take it easy, Felipe.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.